Good morning, St. Parts. I know this may be stating the obvious, but getting sick is no fun. We don't want to be sick. No one plans to be sick. Sickness shows up uninvited, interrupting and disrupting life. The consequences of being sick can be staggering. There's the loss of autonomy or sense of control. Suddenly it seems the body isn't complying. It's doing its own thing. There can be a feeling of helplessness. And it may even seem like a betrayal on the part of the body turning against you. Your thoughts go in the direction of when will this come to an end? And also, what if it won't ever end? Then there's the possible loss of identity. Too often people become defined by their illness. He has AIDS. She has cancer. It's terrible. But society too easily denies people the fullness of who they are and instead only see them and define them by what's ailing them. And with sickness also comes a loss of certainty. Everything becomes contingent upon the condition. I'm not sure when I'll be back at work. Did the doctors give any indication when you may be going home? Years ago, I had an elderly parishioner who early in life was once told by a doctor that he knew when a woman was ready to go home when she felt well enough to put her makeup on. That sounds real old school to me, but anyway, this poor woman was in the hospital, seriously ill. Whenever I visited her, there she was sitting in bed with noticeable makeup on her face. Poor lamb, hoping against hope that someone would notice and send her home. But she was in no condition to leave. Becoming ill one can also lose one's place in community. When sick, the body is not the only thing affected. Sickness can put a strain on relationships, employment, activities, family, friends, and loved ones. Some people may stop calling. One can almost feel forgotten. Or maybe the one who's ill doesn't have the energy to see some people anymore. And there's the economic loss. It's expensive to be ill. Medical care doesn't come cheap. A common cause for bankruptcy is from astronomical medical bills. Depleting and losing one's savings can be devastating. And sickness can also lead to a loss of hope, exhaustion, and suffering having an impact on one's spirit. It's not surprising if through illness one feels there's no future. And finally, there's the reality of dying. For most of us, the hour of our death will more than likely be brought on by sickness and illness. Seriously, my friends, hasn't the last year been a primer for all of this? Isn't this what we learned in the last year? And yet the consequences of being ill, which can be so apparent when sick or when threatened with illness, at the same time can be so easily forgotten when all is well. I think it behooves us to keep vigilant on this and not forget all the ramifications of what it means to be sick in our society. In our gospel today, Mark interweaves two situations about being sick to convey a message to us. First, we have Jairus, who we're told is one of the leaders of the synagogue. This is a man of importance, a leader of the community, a pillar of society. Given his status, he very well may be the kind of person who's always used to getting what he wants. But here he is, kneeling at the feet of an itinerant preacher, Jesus, in complete and utter raw submission. Can we blame him? His little girl is home dying. What an awful tragedy. She's only 12 years old. She's on the cusp of life. She should have nothing but a robust future ahead of her. Perhaps marriage in a few years, children, a family, life, and a lot of it. If you think about it, it's unnatural for parents to bury their children. It's supposed to be the other way around. Children are supposed to outlive and bury their parents. This man begs, perhaps like he's never had to do before. Please, 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 come and lay your hands on my daughter. I am begging you. His plea reminds me of a terribly sad situation in a hospital once, where a father was in the hallway screaming to God, "Take me, take me. If someone has to go, please take me. Let my son live." Jairus is offering, I think, the raw cry of every parent who has had a child in crisis. Jesus is obviously moved. Filled with compassion and mercy, Jesus drops whatever his plans were and goes immediately with Jairus. But then en route, we have this other encounter, which in a way could not be more different, but also somewhat the same. Here's a woman who's been suffering for years. She is at the end of her life. You know she's no person of great importance. She has no name, and her illness has become her sole identity. We know her through the centuries as the woman with hemorrhages. She's on the outer ring of the community, if she's even there. She's endured much under many physicians, and her money is gone, and her situation has only gotten worse. And no one gets out of her way so that she can have a moment with Jesus to plead her case like Jairus got to do. But she takes matters into her own hands and grabs hold of Jesus' cloak. Suddenly she knows she's healed, and Jesus suddenly knows that power has gone out of him. And then, like Jairus, this woman also kneels at the feet of Jesus. And then Jesus arrives, finally, at Jairus' home and restores the young girl's life. What are we to make of this passage? I think it tells us something, first, about Jesus. His awareness, his sensitivity to people in crisis. I think in this story, he meets all three people in their vulnerability. Jairus, a man normally of power and influence, is broken when he comes to Jesus, and Jesus knows that. When the woman touched Jesus' cloak, Jesus wants to know who touched him. The disciples are baffled because they only see a crowd. You see, the crowd is pressing on you. How can you say, "Who touched me?" The disciples don't see the woman. But Jesus is tuned in that there's someone here who's in a terrible way, who's in tremendous need, someone who requires his power, someone who's in need of restoration. And Jesus doesn't simply lay his hands on the young girl, as her father asked, but takes her by the hand and lifts her up to new life. Jesus responds to the vulnerability of these three different individuals, restoring them to health, life, and wholeness. Because he always responds to vulnerability, perhaps more than anything else, offering health, life, and wholeness to those in greatest need of them. But I think this story also has something to say about us. First, I think this story highlights that for all the trappings of life and the so many ways we try to differentiate and distinguish and separate ourselves from one another, be it status, wealth, achievement, affiliations. In the end, illness and sickness are grand equalizers across humanity. We all become one in suffering, sickness, and dying. The things that we think are meaningful in this life, which are really meaningless, quickly fall away in the face of sickness. The other is the lesson that I think we must be more observant and vigilant in paying attention to other people in their vulnerability. The disciples paid attention to Jairus, a man of power and influence. With Christ, that's not enough. We have to pay attention to those who are so marginalized, they're practically invisible, like the woman in today's gospel. I confess I worry that our society is moving in a direction of what seems like intentional insensitivity to the vulnerability of others, a purposeful lack of empathy and compassion, seeing another's tragic situation and wantonly not feeling for them. My friends, that's the death of the soul. The vitality of our souls, I believe, is at stake. We need to remember who we follow, why we follow him, and what he expects from us. We follow a Messiah who is highly sensitive to people's need, pain, suffering, and crisis, and ever ready to meet them there. And he wants those who follow him to do the same. In a strange world that values power over weakness, privilege over compassion, fear and hate over hope and love. We are asked, in fact, I would say it's our gospel mandate, that we are asked to witness a different message back to the world, a message of compassion and mercy. It's about restoration, restoring the dignity of not just some, but of every human being. Jairus, his daughter, a poor soul who comes without a name, but thankfully did come with a lot of chutzpah, as well as people like you and me. So my friends, let's be safe, let's stay well, and for God's sake, let's be kind. God bless you all. Amen.